The Department of Defense has greater authority over the Guard in the District of Columbia than they do in states. How did that play out? How was the coordination handled between the mayor of D.C., the police force in D.C., and then also adding to the confusion, the Department of Justice has various security personnel that they employed within Washington, D.C. There is considerable concern about how all of that played out. What was the level of coordination? Why were there helicopters, military helicopters, buzzing over the top of protesters in the middle of that protest? Who made that decision? What was the level of coordination? And then connected to all of this, as we get beyond the normal use of the Guard, is the Insurrection Act, is the ability of the president to activate active duty military personnel over the objections of governors and use them to deal with civil unrest. How was that considered in this context? There seemed to be conflicting statements out of the White House and out of the Department of Defense about how that was being viewed. We'd like to know what came to pass in that regard. And in particular, the one group of active duty troops that were called up, they were never, as I understand it, deployed, but they were put on standby across the river in Virginia for potential use in Washington, D.C. What played out in that decision as well. But then more broadly than just what happened in this instant, this is something that is going to involve our country in the future, without a doubt. We will have different presidents and different secretaries of defense and different chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who will be having to make decisions like this. So what is the department's view on the role that they should play in dealing with civil unrest? What role should the Guard play? How should they coordinate with governors? When do they think the Insurrection Act is appropriate to be used? How does all of that play out? And then more specifically on that is the question of how, regardless of whether it's the DOD or the state or whoever, how do you deal with civil unrest? Now, I was struck by the fact that there seemed to be a lack of coordination and a lack of thought in that response. I'm not talking about DOD, I'm talking about across the country. As people saw these protests rise up, in some cases turn violent, what was the plan for dealing with that? There's actually a lot of very well-documented history about how to deal with domestic unrest, ranging everywhere from a civil war to protest movements. And we have studied this extensively. I've read quite a bit about it. And what is our plan? You had a lot of the president's rhetoric that sort of sounded like, basically, we will crush you, so you better stop doing this, to a more nuanced approach to how do you de-escalate? How do you protect the legitimate right of people in this country to protest while at the same time stopping crime, stopping protest movements from becoming violent? I think it's something that requires thought, and all leaders in a place to make those decisions need to be better educated on how that comes to pass. And then the last two things that I would like to touch on is, one, the disturbing lack of coordination between what the White House was saying and what DOD was saying, and in some cases doing. The president started a lot of this with his announcement, and forgive me, I forget the exact words, but the general gist of it was, we will bring order to this country, and if the governors don't do it, then I will use the active duty military to do it for them. That statement did not seem to be followed up by any actual actions to do it, but why would he say that if that was the case? And what sort of conversations went on between the Department of Defense and the President and others in the White House about the best way to respond to that? And that gets to an interesting part of this, and that's the difficult position that any Secretary of Defense and any Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is in. You work for the President. He's the commander-in-chief. That's the way the flow chart goes, and his decisions are final, and you have to follow those. Now, it is absolutely impossible that any person in either of your positions would agree 100% of the time with everything the president said. How do you handle those disagreements? How do you work through that? Admittedly that you can't come out in public and say, yeah, I think my boss is an idiot. I completely disagree with his decision. And it is something that happens in this committee all the time. I've been on this committee through 4 presidents, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and whenever that is the case, invariably, the party up here that is not in the White House tries to get everybody at the Department of Defense to admit that some decision by the president, they don't agree with it. Under President Obama, it happened all the time. We had DOD personnel up here, some decision was made, they said, but come on, you really don't think that's the right thing to do? I do understand that in my time anyway, I've never seen a single solitary witness confess and say, oh yeah, I thought that was stupid. That's not the way it works, and I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for an understanding as to how the White House and DOD can better coordinate. We've had a disturbing pattern, not just on the domestic unrest issues, but on a number of issues, of the White House seemingly out of the blue making bold policy statements that affect DOD decisions that do not appear to have been well coordinated, are certainly not well delivered. The decision to pull out of Syria, the decision to remove troops from Germany, the decision to ban transgender people from serving in the military. That one was particularly galling because it came within days after every service chief had testified that there was no problem with them serving. Then a tweet goes out and DOD has to respond. That sends a mixed message to the country about what our defense policy is. And it particularly happened, on Syria when that announcement was made, and then we had to figure out how to make that work. So we are curious within those limitations, how is that coordination happening? Lastly, there is concern about the politicization of the military. And again, this is not unique to any one president. The president's the commander-in-chief, has a duty to guide the military, and at the same time has political interests. But how do we make sure those two things get separate, stay separate? Sorry. And the biggest concern of that, obviously, was the incident at St. John's Church when the president and the Secretary of Defense and a few others, took a picture in front of the church, and then it was quickly turned around into a political ad. It is, I think, incredibly important that we respect the institutions of our government, irrespective of who is in charge. We are a nation of laws, a nation of institutions, not a nation of any one individual. Long after this president is out of office, long after all of us are gone from our current positions, there will be new people in those positions. And those institutions need to survive on their own, not to serve any one particular person's political interests. And I am very concerned about the Department of Defense becoming unduly politicized. I will say for the record that I think both of these gentlemen have done, by and large, an excellent job of not doing that, even in what is a very difficult environment. We have seen politicization happen in the Department of Justice and the intel community to, I personally feel, a shocking degree. I have not seen that at the Department of Defense, and I respect that. I just want to make sure that it doesn't happen, because you make bad decisions in that environment. If the decision is based on the loyalty to one individual instead of loyalty to the country, loyalty to the law, loyalty to what is in all of our best interests, it makes a difficult job even more difficult. So I look forward to the witnesses' answers to these questions and explanations of what happened. And more than anything, I think it is incredibly appropriate that the public sees this in one straightforward situation where the two of the people who are in the middle of this can tell them what happened, what the thinking was, so that we can have greater confidence in those institutions that we so greatly need to make sure that we remain a stable and peaceful nation. And with that, I will yield to Mr. Thornberry for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me join in welcoming the Secretary and the Chairman to be with us, and we appreciate your flexibility in these rather unusual circumstances and locations and all that is required in the current situation. In addition to many of the specific questions that the Chairman laid out, I think one of the most important things that y'all can help us do, which the Chairman also mentioned a couple of times, is help us look at these issues in context, both a historical context and a context of everything that the military is being asked to do these days. Because I am struck by the fact that even when you look at DOD support to civilian law enforcement, obviously we think of the protests and what happened here in Washington, but elements of the military have been doing a lot of law enforcement missions related to COVID for months. Now, again, it's primarily the National Guard that has been doing that, but it seems to me, since the beginning of the year, the military has been asked to take on a number of additional missions unexpectedly, that require different kinds of training and preparation, but at the same time, you still have to pay attention to the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and the terrorists who are trying to kill us every day. And so it's in that larger context, I think, that I am particularly interested in your assessment on how our people are doing and also how our budgets are doing. Because even when it's the Guard in many of these situations that are being asked to do civilian law enforcement, DOD is footing the bill for that. So again, my point is, in addition to a number of particular questions, the larger context, how the military is doing with these added responsibilities is important. Last thing I just want to say is, agreeing with the chairman, the temptation here is to focus on a particular incident, a particular president, and particular political differences. I think what is most helpful for us, as the chairman said, presidents come and go, everybody in our jobs come and go. We're talking in part about an act that was passed in 1807 and hasn't been changed very much since then. So the historical context is also, seems to me, important with the institutions. I keep always in the forefront of my mind the Gallup polls that are done every year. What institutions do you respect the most? The military is at the top of the list, and that's a key national strength of this country. And whatever we do, we want to make sure that the men and women who serve the military continue to have that exalted position of respect throughout the country as presidents come and go, and as issues and incidents come and go. And to me, that is a key responsibility of this Congress. Like the chairman, I'm not going to ask specific questions. I'll go directly to the folks on our side. But again, thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, and distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee, thank you for the opportunity to be before you today. Throughout our history, the United States military has demonstrated an unwavering commitment to uphold our oath to the Constitution and to support our civil authorities. Over the past several months, more than 60,000 service members have unfailingly answered our nation's call, working on the front lines in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic, saving lives, and stemming the spread of the virus. At the same time, we are hard at work as part of Operation Warp Speed to accelerate the development, manufacture, and distribution of therapeutics and vaccines at scale by the end of the year. And over the next few months, we will likely be called upon by the states once again to support hurricane and wildfire relief efforts. No matter the challenges or circumstances, our service members stand ready to serve, and I'm incredibly proud of their dedication and commitment to our fellow Americans. In late May, our ongoing support to civil authorities' mission expanded in the wake of the horrible killing of George Floyd and an officer being charged with his murder, a tragedy we have seen repeated too often in our nation. Following his tragic death, thousands of our fellow citizens sought to exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech and peaceful assembly. While most of these protests were law-abiding, it is clear that some individuals exploited the situation to sow chaos and commit acts of violence, destruction, and theft. That is why, at the height of the civil unrest, more than 43,000 National Guard personnel were called upon by governors across the country to uphold the rule of law, safeguard life and property, and protect the rights of Americans, all Americans, to protest safely and peacefully. As a former soldier and member of the National Guard, I am a firm believer that in these situations, the Guard is best suited to provide domestic support to civil authorities in support of law enforcement. Using active duty forces in a direct law enforcement role should remain a last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. I want to make very clear that no active duty military units engaged protesters or otherwise took part direct part in civilian law enforcement or federal protection missions in the District of Columbia or anywhere else in the country. And with regard to the role the National Guard played in Lafayette Park on June 1, I also want to make clear the following: that the Guard did not advance on the crowd, that the Guard did not shoot rubber bullets, that the Guard did not employ chemical agents of any type. Rather, the Guard remained in a static role as backup to law enforcement if needed. A detailed account of DoD's involvement in the civil unrest beginning May 29, 2020, is included in my written testimony submitted for the record. Following the events that transpired in the District of Columbia, I directed the Secretary of the Army to complete a full after-action review by the end of July. I also directed investigations into 2 separate incidents that occurred that week. And Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to enter into the record my directive to the Secretary of the Army with regard to the conduct of his after-action review.
Without objection, so ordered.
As the American people continue to express their outrage at the killing of Mr. Floyd and long for meaningful change, we once again face the painful truth that racism is real in America. We also know that the Department of Defense is not immune to the forces of bias and prejudice, whether seen or unseen, deliberate or unintentional. These issues have no place in our military because they degrade the morale, cohesion, and readiness of our force. While our military is often led on addressing these issues, the events of recent weeks are a stark reminder that much more work remains to be done. Therefore, on June 17th, I announced 3 new initiatives aimed at advancing equal opportunity, diversity, and inclusion across our force. First, I directed our civilian and uniformed leadership in the Pentagon to bring me concrete ideas by the end of June that we could implement quickly, such as removing photos from selection boards. Second, I established an internal Department of Defense board on diversity and inclusion, which will provide recommendations by the end of the year on how we can increase diversity and ensure equal opportunity for all service members. Finally, I began the process of establishing a Defense Advisory Committee on Diversity and Inclusion in the Armed Services that will be a permanent structure composed of an independent and diverse group of Americans committed to building upon the work of the Defense Board over the long term. These are just the first steps towards shifting our culture and creating lasting change across our enterprise. In doing so, we will build a better force, one that is diverse, inclusive, and more representative of the American people we serve and we protect. And while we may come from different backgrounds and parts of the country, we all make the same commitment to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. We all strive to uphold that oath and serve in an apolitical manner at all times. By doing so, we earn the trust and confidence of the American people. Meanwhile, while much has been focused on our support to our fellow Americans at home, thousands of military personnel remain engaged abroad in harm's way to ensure that we can enjoy the blessings of this country. We take very seriously any threats to our forces, whether in Afghanistan or anywhere else across the globe. I want our adversaries to know that we will always do our utmost to ensure their safety and security. In closing, I want to assure the American people that the Department of Defense takes seriously our oath to defend the Constitution, with many having paid the ultimate sacrifice to protect the sacred rights and freedoms this document guarantees all of us. We will continue to protect and defend our homeland, our people, and our way of life as we work to build a better force, one that represents the rich diversity of our great nation. Thank you.
Chairman Milley.
Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Thornberry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today with Secretary Esper. It's indeed an honor to represent the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen stationed around the world protecting our freedoms. Today, as you know, we are operating globally and here at home. The past few months have been exceptionally challenging times for America. The COVID-19 pandemic has stressed our health system, our economy, and the social fabric of our communities. In addition, George Floyd's death amplified the pain, the frustration, and the fear that so many of our fellow Americans live with day in and day out. I have many policemen in my family, and I am personally outraged by George Floyd's brutal and senseless killing. The protests that have ensued not only speak to this injustice, but also to centuries of injustice towards Black Americans. We as a nation and as a military are still struggling with racism, and we have much work to do. We who wear the cloth of our nation understand that cohesion is a force multiplier. Divisiveness leads to defeat. As one of our famous presidents said, a house divided does not stand. Our troops are part of cohesive teams consisting of people of different races and genders and religious and sexual orientations working to accomplish their mission in peace and war all over the globe. Equality and opportunity are matters of military readiness, not just political correctness. There is no place in our armed forces for manifestations or symbols of racism, bias, or discrimination. We, the military, have a long history of inclusiveness, teamwork, and merit that is the keystone to American military success. In fact, this month, 71 years ago, 1948, Harry Truman integrated the Armed Forces of the United States, 17 years before the 1965 Civil Rights Act. But we are not perfect, and we must thoughtfully examine our institution and ensure it is a place where all Americans see themselves represented and have equal opportunity to succeed, especially in leadership positions. And every member of our joint force, including myself, has sworn an oath to support and defend the United States Constitution. This oath underpins my duties as the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I am deeply committed to fulfilling both the letter and the spirit of my oath, regardless of consequences to self. We, the United States military, hold dear the Constitution and the principle of an apolitical military that is so deeply rooted in the very essence of our republic. My role as the chairman is to be the principal military advisor to the President of the United States, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, and the Homeland Security Council. And throughout the recent period of civil unrest in our nation, I exercised this role exclusively. At no time was I ever in command of any forces. All of my actions have been consistent with my statutory authority as an advisor who is explicitly not in the chain of command. We should also be proud that the vast majority of the protests we saw around the country were peaceful. And peaceful protest means that American freedom is working. Some protests, however, turned violent. In Minneapolis, significant violence began on the evening of 26 May, where looting, commercial property damage, and arson quickly overwhelmed the Minneapolis firefighters and police officers. On 28 May, Governor Tim Walz declared a state of emergency and activated the Minnesota Guard under his authority and deployed them to Minneapolis to support state and local law enforcement. The Secretary of Defense and I spoke by telephone with the governor to better understand the situation in Minneapolis and see if he required any additional assistance. This conversation helped inform my military advice. Over the night of 29 May, the number of violent protests increased nationally to 13 major cities, escalating to 34 just 2 days later. By the morning of 1 June, 29 states and the District of Columbia had activated their National Guards, totaling more than 17,000 National Guards men and women. In Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, faced 3 nights of escalating violence starting on Friday, May 29th. The White House increased its security posture. The federal government vacated certain buildings. Our nation's monuments and government buildings were defaced. Businesses in D.C. were looted, and some were set ablaze. With more than 420 arrests and 150 law enforcement officers and half a dozen National Guardsmen injured, it was reported to me that it was the worst 3 days of violence in Washington, D.C. in over 30 years. There were troops and police from 22 different organizations, not including those from the active duty, in the vicinity of the Military District of Washington. There were 3 major departments, Department of Justice, Department of the Interior, and Department of Defense, all involved. There were National Guard troops from 11 different states, and the chain of command for those National Guard troops ran from the President to the Secretary of Defense to the Secretary of the Army to Major General Walker, and it never changed. Since the protests began, I sought information to help me assess the ability of federal, state, and local authorities to handle situations under their responsibility. And I met and spoke with National Guard leadership and troops often, Army and DoD leadership, Department of Justice, and others, along with governors and D.C. officials. I continually assessed and advised that it was not necessary to employ active duty troops in response to the civil unrest occurring in our nation. It was my view then, and it remains so now, that local, state, and federal police, backed up by the National Guard under governor control, could and continually can effectively handle the security situation in every case across the country. However, I recommended to the Secretary of Defense, and he ordered about 1,700 active duty troops to an increased alert posture in the vicinity of Washington, D.C., but none of them were ever used, and there was never an active duty troop used in any location anywhere in the United States. Additionally, I repeatedly advised the Secretary of Defense, and he repeatedly ordered de-escalation measures to be taken, including removing weapons and helmets and consistent with force protection measures. These de-escalation measures were widely implemented from 2 to 3 June, and by 4 June, active duty and National Guard units began redeploying from the vicinity of Washington, D.C. back to their home station. And a more detailed account is in the written record. I'm incredibly proud of the professionalism exhibited by the citizen soldiers who make up our National Guard. Since their formation, they have operated in support of local and state governments throughout history, responding to hurricanes, forest fires, health crises, COVID-19, the pandemic, and many forms of civil unrest throughout the years. By my research, I count at least 19 times that National Guard and militia troops were used in support of the Insurrection Act, and it's important to note the Insurrection Act was not invoked in the last several weeks. The United States military comes from the people of our nation, and we remain dedicated to the Constitution. We will never turn our back on that document. We swore an oath of allegiance at the cost of our lives to an idea embedded within that document, and we will always protect it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Members will now be recognized in the order that they were here when the gavel dropped. There is a 5-minute limit, and we won't have enough time to get to every member. So I'm going to be ruthless on the 5-minute clock. And one of the hardest problems there is a lot of times witnesses are in the middle of an answer when that 5-minute clock goes up. I am not attempting to be rude or attempting to cut you off. I will try to give you the opportunity to complete your thought. But as members ask questions and witnesses answer, understand when the 5 minutes is up, we're going to do our level best to, as quickly as possible, move on to the next member. And with that, first on our side is Representative Davis, who is participating remotely. Representative Davis, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Secretary Esper and General Milley. We appreciate your joining us for this. I wanted to start with you, Mr. Secretary. You mentioned the after-action review on July 30th. Is that on course for the end of the month? And will we be scheduling a briefing on that?
Congress, I'm not sure I heard parts of your question didn't come through, but I think you asked, is the after-action review on track, and will you be briefed on it? If that was your question, I spoke to Secretary McCarthy just yesterday. As you may know, he played a very prominent role in all this. I know he briefed the committee a few weeks ago along with General Walker, but he is handling that piece of the review. His assessment currently is that it's on track. I'm, though, however, more concerned about getting it right than getting it done quick. But my aim would be after that to make that available to you. Also, something that I put forth in my directive to him was to be prepared to take his findings and recommendations and to have a similar conversation, a similar type of review process with law enforcement that was on the ground in D.C., because I think that's a very important second step in that process, to have that discussion so that we can have the lessons learned and work them out between us and law enforcement for the if this happens again.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know we're all concerned about being prepared, and I wanted to especially focus on the 1st of June, because that was a time that there was concern that there was a great deal of violence that day, and the understanding, I think, of most people that were on the ground in terms of, including the reporting of the Washington Post and others, is that that particular day, actually, it was peaceful. And there may have been a few incidents. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I understand from all the reporting that that was the case. And that in fact, the park police, as you mentioned, was there. You talked, General Milley talked about the guard being there as backup, but we saw Attorney General Bill Barr actually talking about the fact that it was violent and that they needed to move forward because they were very worried of things coming out of control. And I just wondered from where you sit today, do you think that assessment that in fact it was violent on that day and that there was a need to even have the guard as backup? Is that true? Do you think that in further reflection that isn't quite what people thought?
Congresswoman, I think when you look back at the days leading up to June 1st, you see a tremendous amount of violence that had been building up over a period of days. If I have my numbers right, that over a period of 3 days, I think eventually, regrettably, over 50 park police officers were injured. Over 60 Secret Service agents were injured. We had 6 National Guardsmen hurt, to include one who was hit in the head with a brick and suffered a concussion. You had parts of D.C., to include the church, set on fire, and other acts of vandalism across the area. So there was a great deal of consternation by law enforcement with regard to what might happen that evening of June 1st. I think that's why there was the push to get additional law enforcement in as soon as possible, backed up by National Guard, so that you had enough presence to calm the situation down, regain some degree of control, and allow for Americans to peacefully protest their government, to express their outrage over the brutal murder of George Floyd, and to allow those things to happen free of violence from those individuals, those folks out there who were trying to cause mischief. So that's my assessment. The chairman may have something to add on that.
Well, I was just going to say, Secretary, I think that this certainly is an area to take a very hard look at and to be certain that it's clear among the departments, because even when we asked those questions, when we had Army leadership here, they actually were not clear about what was going on. They had situational awareness, but they didn't know who ordered the clearing of protesters or who authorized the helicopters to use.
I'm sorry, the gentlelady's,
so all those
Susan,
issues need to be looked at.
your time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to thank Secretary Esper and General Milley for your leadership. You give great confidence to everyone in this committee on both sides of the aisle. I want to appreciate your strong words, both of you, on the killing of George Floyd. The fact that your whole focus is protecting people's First Amendment rights is incredibly important and should be foundational and important to this discussion. I appreciate your recognition of the outrage that everyone felt. And I appreciate your condemnation of racism and the fact that we're dealing with this as a nation across all areas, and you're being called at a very difficult time. Ms. Secretary, I appreciate your statements on diversity and inclusion. This committee took several actions with the National Defense Authorization Act that I think will be helpful, and we look forward to your comments on those. You made a statement. I have 3 questions. We have limited time. I have 3 questions. One, you said that the Guard is best to support these efforts. Is it because of their dual nature, of the fact that they are both private citizens and serve in the military?
I think, first of all, Congressman, thank you for your comments. First of all, I think that, one, they are citizen soldiers, and that matters, because they often come from those communities in which they may be serving. They are protecting their fellow Americans. They understand what's happening in the neighborhoods and the community, so I think that's important. Number 2, they are trained, in many cases, to do civil disturbance. And number 3, they are equipped to do this. So it's part of what we call their mission essential task list, their METAL tasks, in most cases, to perform these duties. And again, having been a citizen soldier myself, I appreciate their capacity at this, which is better in many cases than the active duty.
Mr. Secretary, I have a question for you that I believe it has the narrowness of which is going to be helpful for all of us. So I would appreciate if you'd let me finish the entire question so we can get to the narrowness part that I think will give you comfort. I understand the rules with respect to classified material, and I also understand that things that haven't happened are not classified. Mr. Secretary, during your time as Secretary, have you ever received an intelligence briefing where it stated that Russia had offered bounties for the killing of American soldiers? And if you had, wouldn't you think that was important enough to bring to the attention of the President? And I'm focusing here on the narrowness of the word bounties. And I want you to know also that the people in this room know the answer to the question. We're not able to give the answer because of the rules, but you are. And I think with the narrowness of this question, we would greatly appreciate your answering it. Have you received a intel briefing that included the word bounty with respect to Russians and the killing of American men and women in uniform?
Congressman, to the best of my recollection, I have not received a briefing that included the word bounty.
Mr. Secretary, I really appreciate you saying that. Now, the next question then is, and if you had, wouldn't that have risen to the level of importance enough for you to bring it to the President's attention? That would be an action item, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be so outrageous that you would bring that up the chain of command.
If it was a credible report, that's important, a credible corroborated report that used those words, certainly it would have been brought to my attention by the chain of command, by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others for action. It would have been, and we would have taken upon that action in an interagency effort to make sure that we addressed it. But look, at all times, we take force protection very seriously and take all those actions, regardless of the credibility of a report. We take all that seriously.
I understand. Turning back to this issue, Mr. Secretary, the mayor of D.C. has a police chief. Governors have access to other resources with respect to the Guard. Could you compare and contrast those with us? Because it's important for people to understand when people talk about the mayor of D.C. being consulted versus a governor being consulted, what their structures are.
So first of all, I want to commend the police chief of Metro Police Department. He worked very well and was very helpful to the Secretary of the Army during those difficult days. So I want to commend him. But as I understand it, he is the police force for Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. does not have a state police force like many other states have that they can call upon if they will. And, of course, the D.C. Guard does not report to the mayor. The D.C. Guard, the commander is the commander-in-chief, the president, who can delegate that authority to me, and then I can further delegate it down. So the capabilities of the D.C. to handle civil unrest is limited, as best I know it, to just the Metro Police Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Larson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to ask a few questions. First off, for Secretary Esper, and this has to do with the after-action report and the coordination question. The D.C. National Guard leadership, in response to the D.C. protest, the D.C. National Guard leadership is the only agency that runs through a chain of command up to you. Is that correct?
Yes, the D.C. chain of command, National Guard chain of command, runs from the commanding general, Major General Walker, to the Secretary of the Army, to me, and then to the President of the United States.
And that was the only agency unit involved that ran through the chain of command of the department. Is that right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't pick up the second word that you said.
I'm sorry. That's the only agency that ran up through the DoD chain of command in response to the D.C. protest. Is that right?
Yes, that would be outside of any active duty. That's correct, with regard to Title 32. Otherwise, all other National Guard forces, either in their home states or that eventually deployed to Washington, D.C., remained under the command of the state's governors. and
Okay.
General Walker's
That's fine.
role was tactical control on the ground.
Yeah. So there's video of non-uniformed federal government folks who were deployed to Washington, D.C., presumably from the Bureau of Prisons and presumably at the request of the Attorney General. You mentioned that you're doing an after-action report, and that after-action report will apply only at this point to the Department of Defense and the D.C. National Guard. Is that where it stands right now?
Yes, Congressman. The note I sent to the Secretary of the Army was to look at the National Guard writ large. It directed him to focus also on the events in D.C. and then, of course, related issues that arose, like the use of helicopters. And he's to look at training, equipping, organization, all those issues that might be that in his findings that might include findings and lessons learned for future employment of the National Guard.
Thank you. Do you know at this time whether or not the head of the D.C. National Guard was aware of the deployment of these non-uniformed, presumably federal law enforcement folks that created a perimeter around the White House, I think on June 3rd? Was that coordinated? Have you concluded if that was coordinated yet with the D.C. National Guard?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question. Let me answer it this way. The chairman and I spoke to Major General Walker yesterday. He had an understanding of who was on the ground in Lafayette Park. He was there. He knew that the D.C. National Guard were in a supporting role to the Park Police.
Can I stop you there? You're talking about Lafayette Park. That's fine, but there were other law enforcement deployed who were apparently non-local, non-DC. They were federal law enforcement, also deployed to take actions within DC, within the boundaries of the District of Columbia. And I'm asking if you know yet whether or not those actions were coordinated with the DC National Guard or not.
My understanding is, because I was with Secretary of the Army McCarthy, the chairman, we were down at the FBI Joint Operations Center on Monday evening with representatives from a number of agencies. I can't list them all, federal as you described them. So I know it was fairly well coordinated. Secretary McCarthy did an outstanding job with regard to working that out on the spot, and Major General Walker was by his side most of the time. I'll turn to Chairman Milley, see if he has anything to add on that.
I've got about 30 seconds.
So, Congressman, I can't confirm or deny that all of those federal law enforcement agencies were tied into the D.C. National Guard. Personally, for Walker, I'd have to go talk to Walker specifically about that. But all of the federal agencies came underneath the Department of Justice, except for the Park Police, who are under the Department of the Interior, and the Metro Police remain under the command and control of the mayor. So I don't know if that helps clarify or not, but.
Thank you. A little bit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, no, that does help. That's a major question that we have. Mr. Rogers is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman, thank you both for being here and for your service to our country. Mr. Secretary, in early June, you requested members of the National Guard under Section 502F of Title 32. You made some reference to this, but can you give us a more full picture of what the command and control structure under that authority is, and kind of give us an organizational structure?
Are you speaking, I assume, within Washington, D.C.?
Within Washington, D.C., yes. I'm sorry.
So you're right. On the afternoon of 1 June, we knew we would have available throughout that evening up to 1,200 D.C. National Guard. As we just described, they work for Major General Walker, who was reporting to Secretary of the Army McCarthy, who was reporting to me. We estimated that we needed 3,800 additional National Guard to support the efforts in D.C. So what we did was, through a combination of myself and General Langell, had reached out to a number of states to seek the permission from the governor to deploy their elements of their guard to D.C. to support the law enforcement effort. 11 states, if my number is correct, it provided that, and it got us to a little bit over 5,000 on the ground. It took a period of days to do that, but that gave us the numbers we needed. At all times, the Guard units coming in from outside of D.C., non-D.C. National Guard, were under 502F authorities, funded by the federal government. Their role was to protect federal functions, property, and personnel, and at all times they remained under the control of their governors.
I want to shift a little bit. Mr. Chairman, in your opening remarks, you made reference to the fact that 60,000 service members have been employed dealing with a variety of issues, mostly COVID, but some other law enforcement. I know it's mostly National Guard. And this is kind of a follow-up to Mr. Thornberry's questions. How are they holding up with all this variety of missions that's been hoisted? And 47,000 of those are National Guardsmen have been working in COVID. What is the state of the National Guard right now, given the way they're being spread out? And then as a follow-up to that, the economic impact to your budgets and what we are going to need to backfill. So
the numbers, you got the numbers about right. For the National Guard, globally, about 120,000 are on duty, on active duty. About 45,000, I think, if I remember this right from my briefing with Joe Langell, about 45,000 are dedicated to COVID. At the peak, not right this minute, but at the peak, there were around 40 to 43,000 on the civil unrest under governor control. And then there's about 30,000 doing Title X missions around the world or in the United States. So about 120 total, which is significant. That's a big chunk of the U.S. National Guard, both Army and Air. The reports to me are morale is good. They feel good about their contribution, and they join the Guard to make sure that they make a contribution to the nation. So I'm not particularly aware of any particular issues, but they're going pretty fast at a high op tempo, probably faster than they have in the past, except during the surge periods of Iraq and Afghanistan.
What about the economic impact to your budgets of having these individuals deployed in these various missions that were unplanned?
There is an economic impact. I don't know that it's not going to. I don't think it's going to break the DoD back on the economic impact because of the numbers, but there is an impact, absolutely.
So you don't expect to be asking the Congress for additional money to replace that or backfill that money in a supplemental later this year?
I'll leave that up to the Secretary.
We've been keeping careful accounting of the dollars. The comptroller, that's obviously something we need to come back to on to make sure we understand what those numbers are and how material they are to the budget.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Secretary, do you believe that the Insurrection Act needs any legislative modification by this Congress?
Well, the Insurrection Act is an extraordinary piece of legislation, as we know, is endured well over the past couple hundred years, and it is under the exclusive authority of the president. So it would not be appropriate for me to opine in terms of material changes to the act. I would reserve that to the president. My view is there's nothing that's happened that strikes me as compelling to change it at this point in time.
Great. Thank you both for being here. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Courtney is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Particularly, I want to recognize both of you made very strong comments and expressing, your upholding your oath in terms of supporting the First Amendment and people's right to protest peacefully. Of course, another part of the First Amendment is freedom of the press, and freedom of the press did not have a very good day on June 1st. A couple days ago, over at the Natural Resources Committee, a reporter from Australia, Amelia Brace, who is a TV news reporter, was at Lafayette Park with her cameraman, Tim Myers, when the U.S. Park Police, two of the officers, just completely assaulted them on live television. She was actually broadcasting into the morning show in Australia. It's kind of the equivalent of the Today Show. And I don't know if it's still coming through here, but in any case, her testimony described, again, the riot shield of the park police being rammed into the chest and stomach of the cameraman, and on camera you could see her getting hit with a truncheon. She was shot with rubber bullets, and both of them were hospitalized. So again, I just wanted to maybe give you both an opportunity to just go on the record to say that, we obviously, as part of recognizing the First Amendment, recognize that the media has a role to play that's protected by the Constitution. In fact, the order that the mayor issued exempted the media from the curfew that was in place on June 1st. And I just would ask both of you to comment on that, because frankly, this was on live television in Australia, who was probably one of our closest allies.
Congressman, I'll go first. And you're right, Australia is one of our most important allies. I spent the other night, as the chairman knows, speaking with my counterpart in Australia. Let me say this. We've said it numerous times. I swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, and I do that not just because I swore an oath, but because I believe deeply in that document and all that it guarantees our rights and democracy. And you've talked about the First Amendment. The First Amendment, that includes the Big Five, and one of which is the freedom of the press. And I think a free and open press is critical to the efficient functioning of our democracy. And so I think that's something that we cherish. That's one of the reasons why, the National Guard, when it gets used in defense of supportive civil authorities, is out there, is to give Americans the right to peacefully assemble, to express their views, and for the press to cover it, hopefully as accurately as possible, so that the American people can have an understanding of what's happening in the country.
And Congressman, I'm not familiar with the particular incident that you're referring to, but I'm deeply committed to a free press. Like I said, I'll die for the Constitution. It's an idea, and part of that is a free media, and a free media is fundamentally essential to a free people, and it's fundamental to our democracy. So, absolutely, I'm committed to that.
Well, thank you both. Again, this was front page news in Australia, and I would just say that it was the park police. It was not National Guardmen who were involved in that violence that took place there. But the fact is as the Secretary's testimony indicates, the D.C. National Guard was acting in support of local police authorities, including the park police. And I think, frankly, whatever after action report goes out, the fact that media are present in situations where they have a legal duty, not just a right, but a duty to be there, which was recognized by the District of Columbia, that really there's got to be some training to make sure that people recognize that it's off limits to treat them in any way that's inappropriate, which is exactly what happened. And I would encourage you to watch the testimony, which took place from Ms. Brace. It's actually quite shocking, and frankly, given the fact that it happened to an ally of ours, it will make you heartsick to watch it. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Conaway is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll yield my time for the next Republican on the list.
Okay. Mr. Lamborn. Mr. Lamborn, are you with us? Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your service. I wanted to focus on an issue of importance to constituents in my district. I've had the privilege of hosting both of you, Secretary Esper, in your capacity when you were Secretary of the Army, as well as General Milley. I've spent time with you at Fort Drum. And given some of the recent press reports regarding Afghanistan, as you know, I represent military families and 10th Mountain Division soldiers who are currently deployed in Afghanistan. And I wanted to get your comments, General Milley, on your commitment and the department's commitment to force protection at all costs. That is one of my top priorities, whether it's rebuilding military readiness, investing in training, investing in equipment, and having the most exquisite, exceptional intelligence that's verified out there. But I think it's important for families to know the lengths to which the department goes to ensure that we are protecting the safety and well-being of our service members deployed. I'll start with you, General Milley.
You have 1,000% commitment. I've got 3 tours in Afghanistan and multiple tours in a lot of other places. And I've buried a lot of people in Arlington National Cemetery, so I am committed to the nth degree to protect our force, and we will ensure that they have all the right equipment, training, alerts, warnings, intel, etc. I know what you're referring to, specifically with the Russians, and I will tell you that we were at the highest levels of force protection. Units and people are and were informed and will remain informed. and we're going to get to the bottom of all that. But I can assure the families that the force protection of our force, not only for me, but for every commander all the way down the line, that's the number one priority for every one of us. Absolutely.
Thank you. Secretary Esper?
I 1,000% agree as well. I say it again as a former soldier myself with one combat tour under my belt. This is something I talk about with the commanders all the time, General Miller and General McKenzie on multiple occasions. We make adjustments all the time across the theater and other theaters, but force protection is number one. To take care of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, they are our most vital resource, our most trusted asset, and we will do everything and anything it takes to protect them.
My next question, and just so you know, I sit on the House Intelligence Committee, so I have received the classified briefings. Understanding we are in an unclassified setting right now, I also think it's important to talk about how we know, going years back, that Russia has meddled in Afghanistan, as well as other countries have also involved themselves in Afghanistan, counter to our commitments and our strategic goals in the region, whether that's Iran, whether that's China using economic tools. So I wanted to get your comment on that because I think it's important to consider that long-term impact rather than just this one illegal leak that's been covered in the media.
Well, on the specific to the Russians, yes, we've known for years that the Russians have been involved for their own national security interests in Afghanistan, and the Russians are not our friends, and their involvement is worrisome, and we monitor it closely and we take the appropriate actions. The Chinese are involved, the Pakistanis are involved, the Iranians. There's a lot of countries involved in Afghanistan, and many of them have offensive forethought against the U.S. and U.S. forces, et cetera. We're aware of a lot of that, not perhaps every single thing, but we're aware of a lot of it, and we take the appropriate measures. And with respect to the issue, and was previously asked by one of the other congressmen, we are aware of the variety of intelligence that you briefed on this morning, and we are pursuing that.
Secretary Esper, any comments on that?
I share the same views as the chairman. The Russians have been involved, and many, many other countries and many other players, non-state players in Afghanistan for a long time. And we take all that into account, and I can tell you on other occasions we have adapted force posture, we've adapted authorities, equipment, you name it, rules of engagement to make sure that our forces were well protected and able to accomplish their mission.
And then my last question, can you discuss the damage that illegal leaks have on our ability to collect intelligence, on our force protection measures, because I'm very concerned the damage that illegal leaks have in general when it comes to our national security.
I'm conscious of the clock. The illegal leaks are terrible. They're happening across the government, particularly in the Defense Department. I'm pushing forward on a new effort to remind people of OPSEC, whether it's pre-decisional, unclassified items or even classified items. It hurts our national security. It jeopardizes our troops, and it is just damaging to our government and our relationships with our allies and partners.
Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi is recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Garamendi, are you with us? Make sure you unmute yourself. Don't see him, actually, so we'll move on to Mr. Norcross. Mr. Norcross, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Esper, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that the National Guard did not play an active role or advance on the crowd, did not use rubber bullets, paraphrasing that, and used the term static role. I'd like to focus on that and the events of June 1st involving the Army National Guard helicopter. How would you refer to that as a static role? And I have a follow-up when we're finished.
Congressman, I was referring to the static role with regard to the actions of the National Guard in Lafayette Park on June 1st. The helicopter issues in question that you're raising happened later that evening, I think maybe around 11 p.m. or so. I don't recall the times. So obviously that was different. That was not a static role. I was talking about the forces on the ground in Lafayette Park.
Thank you for clarifying that. When Secretary McCarthy was with us earlier this month, he mentioned that the report on the investigation was going to be very soon. We understand it might be finished now. When is that going to be released to us and to the public?
So, Congressman, I spoke to Secretary McCarthy about this. As you know, I launched this investigation within 2 hours of finding out about it, I think on June 2nd, if memory serves me. The investigation was conducted. It is completed. It is being reviewed by Secretary McCarthy. I think, if I'm looking at the Chairman Milley, DOD, IG may take a look at it, but it should be available next week to the committee. That's the latest report I got from the Secretary of the Army. Chairman, is that correct?
That's correct. The DOD IG has to do their review, so I would expect it pretty shortly, like within days, perhaps early next week.
Thank you, and I yield the balance of my time to Mikey Sharp, New Jersey.
Yeah, that gets awkward. Pause the clock for a second. Mikey, do you wish to take the time? If you do, you got to come forward. Beg your pardon? Oh, she's here. Michelle, you're recognized for the remainder of the time, 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Thank you.
Secretary Esper and General Milley, I echo the chairman's concern about politicizing our military, and given the attempts at politicizing our military in the unorthodox way the president attempted to control troops in our nation's capital, I want to discuss some of the legal underpinnings of civilian control. Because I have such a short period of time, I'm looking for a yes or no. If you don't know the answer, please just let me know. You'll take it for action. Secretary Esper and General Milley, you've both testified that you have taken oaths to the Constitution of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that oath includes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and bear true faith and allegiance to the same, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
And are you both aware that Article 2 of the Constitution states that the executive power shall be vested in a president, in other words, one or a single president?
Yes.
Yes.
And are you both aware that Article 2 of our Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy of the United States?
Yes.
Yes.
And Secretary Esper, are you aware that the president's power to remove office cabinet officials from key national security positions, including the Secretary of Defense, is undisputed?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Certainly. Are you aware that the president's power to remove from office key cabinet officials, especially in national security positions, including the Secretary of Defense, is undisputed?
Yes.
And General Milley, are you aware that the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which applies to all uniformed officers, criminalizes mutiny and sedition and soliciting or advising on the commission of mutiny or sedition?
Absolutely. Yes.
And Secretary Esper, are you aware of the fundamental proposition that the Secretary of Defense is selected by the legitimate president?
Yes, and confirmed by the Senate.
And that the legitimate commander-in-chief is the one who oversees the chain of command, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So finally, the Insurrection Act states that whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States makes it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress rebellion. Yes?
Yes.
And unfortunately, the gentlelady is out of time. Mr. Desjardins, I do not see you on the screen. You are next. Okay, we'll go on to Mr. Gates. Mr. Gates, you are recognized for 5 minutes if you are, in fact, with us. Mr. Bacon, you're usually pretty good at this. Mr. Bacon, are you on the screen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate both our Secretary of Defense and our Chairman for your leadership, and have the utmost respect for y'all. I wanted to just ask if you can say it. The report on the bounties, did it originate from an intelligence agency within the military, like the DIA, or was this from outside of the military?
I'm sorry, Congressman, I didn't hear the question. Did you ask if...
The intelligence report that talks about the Russian bounties in Afghanistan, did that come from outside of the DOD, like CIA or NSA, or was this from like DIA, or did it come from a military intelligence agency?
It was not produced by a DOD intelligence agency.
Okay, I thank you for that. Because I go back to what Ms. Stefanik said. These leaks, I think, undermine our intelligence communities, and it just undermines the confidence of the citizens, either to the president in this case, or depending on what side of the aisle you're on or where you stand, to our intelligence organizations themselves. And how active are you in pursuing similar type leaks within DOD? Because I think it's imperative that we start holding people accountable to the maximum extent the law allows. So I'd be just curious for your insights on this. Thank you.
Congressman, we are aggressively pursuing leaks within the Defense Department. We had some, I would categorize as bad leaks last fall. So when we turned the corner of the new year, I emphasized on day one of the new year of 2020 that OPSEC was going to be a key thing for us to focus on. Leaks continued. I've launched an investigation that is underway to go after leaks, whether it's of classified information or unclassified information that is sensitive, and also, unauthorized discussions with the media. All those things, again, hurt our nation's security. They undermine our troops, their safety. They affect our relations with other countries. They undermine our national policy. It's bad, and it's happening all over the government, executive branch, legislative branch to some degree. So it's something we need to get control of. And this is not new to this administration. Previous administrations, Republican and Democrat alike, have had to deal with this. It's bad, and it's unlawful, and it needs to stop.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate your comments there. I also liked your comments a couple of days ago, where I appreciated your transparency, I should say, on the report itself. You said that it was not corroborated, that you didn't have the level of confidence, perhaps, that the president would get the briefing. Is that still your opinion?
It is the opinion of a number of intelligence entities, agencies, that could not corroborate the report.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to switch subjects or topics on you briefly. Could you just go through, or maybe this is more for the chairman, what kind of training the Guard gets when it comes to supporting law enforcement? Is it universal to all the Guard members, or is it to certain specialties? How does that work? Thank you.
Great question. The National Guard, as Secretary said up front, now really we're talking about Air Force Police and the Army National Guard. As part of their mission essential task list, most of the ground units will be trained explicitly in civil disturbance and support of law enforcement. Those would be infantry units, but primarily military police. And the DC Guard explicitly is trained in that. In addition to that, you get refresher training throughout the year and throughout their weekend drills, et cetera. So they are trained. Not every single guardsman, not every single unit, but the ground force units that are most likely to work in the civil disturbance area or in support of law enforcement are trained.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll close with just a comment. I appreciate the teamwork that the Guard gave the DC authorities, and also in the other 30 some odd cities that they were a part of. And what I'm hearing from our local constituents is how appalled they are that, that church was burnt, firebombed, and the AFL-CIO was torched. Many of the memorials were defaced, and action was needed to be taken and restoring law and order. So I appreciate what the Guard did to support our law enforcement. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Gallego is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Secretary Esper or Jerry Milley, can you explain to us the actual command structure how it was set up? We had the National Guard working with local police as well as park police. So how did that happen? How was the communications between all parties involved, and who was actually in actual command control of that area of Lafayette Square, let's say?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Congressman. It's not clear. You understand chains of command
Right.
from your service, so it defies that in many ways. So I'll just speak to National Guard under Title 32 for D.C. I already explained. President to me, to the Secretary of the Army, to the head of Major General Walker. In support of law enforcement, and law enforcement was both Department of Justice agencies, entities, and Department of Interior, specifically Park Police.
Okay.
That relationship is more of a cooperative one. It's not something that you and I and others who serve would understand as OPCON or tactical control. It's more of a cooperative relationship where the law enforcement would say, look, you would help us if you were here, here, and here, and then we would agree or not agree to do that. But it was a very good relationship that made that work out. Okay. And then, of course, any Guard units coming into the city remain under the control of the governors, but also reported to General Walker, but more, again, on a cooperative, I'll call it cooperative than a traditional military relationship.
So that being said, the deployment of the National Guard in front of Lafayette Square, the day of the incident on June 1st, there was an agreement between, General Milley, if you could answer this, at some point there was a discussion that the National Guard should stay here in a static position and on this day. So there was a conversation. Who was that conversation between?
I'm not sure specifically who, but I think it was probably Secretary McCarthy and General Walker and the Department of Justice, perhaps Attorney General Barr, or representatives, or the representatives of the Department of Interior and the Park Police, perhaps Park Police Captain. I'm not sure the specific individuals. I can find that out, though, and get back to you.
Yep, I appreciate it. And then what was the method of communication between, because we're dealing cross agencies, what were they talking over cell phones to each other? How did we actually communicate across all these agencies, especially considering the tense situation that everyone was dealing with?
Good.
Well, I was going to say there was a command post set up, a combined command post with all the different agencies. 11, you had the Metropolitan Police represented there, the Park Police with Department of Interior, Secret Service, FBI, DEA, ATF, Capitol Police, Bureau of Prisons, U.S. Marshals, and various counties from around Arlington, or various police force from around Arlington County, plus the D.C. Guard. They're all located in the FBI building. So they did the larger coordination there. And then at the various monuments, for example, that's Department of Interior, and that's Park Police with the D.C. Guard.
Just specific to Lafayette Square.
They would communicate cell phones, and or they would be co-located face-to-face. And one guy would have a radio for his particular agency, and the other guy would have a radio for his.
And the National Guards were largely, when we were communicating to the National Guard, that was done over radio.
I think it's a combination.
Combination.
Yeah, I think it would be a combination.
Could we also figure that out too? What was the method of communication?
Yeah.
And lastly,
if there's air-ground communication, and there's
especially if there was any communication over radio through the National Guard. The National Guard used, I'm assuming that we have a transcript of the conversations that were happening.
That I'm not so sure. I don't know if there's actually.
Could you check on that also?
If it's a military communication, I doubt there's a transcript. Just if it's a radio. I may be wrong, but I doubt it.
Can you check to see if there's any recordings specific to the date of June 1st? Or any other recordings that
Police
the DOD have?
Normally do that. I'm not so sure about but we can find out. We can get it. Yeah.
Thank you. I yield back in time.
Thank you. And actually, I do have one follow-up question. Do either of you know who specifically gave the order to clear the protesters out of Lafayette Square ahead of the president's visit to the church on June 1st? You said the Guard was in support. Who gave the order? And to whom, I guess, to clear the protesters out of that square?
We've had that discussion a few times. We had it the other day with Secretary McCarthy and Major General Walker, and it's still unclear to me who gave the direction to clear the park at that moment in time.
See, I find that hard to believe. I'm sorry, but it's like a pretty big decision. A lot of people there, everyone's there, and it just sort of happened.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't know. I have never inquired. I've never pursued it with anybody because you get caught up on other things more relevant to.
Well, how did you know to have the Guard hold back? Because I think there's a lot of testimony that says the Guard did not participate in the clearing of the square. Why did they not participate?
I think, Congressman, that's we could actually get something from General Walker. I want to say, I don't want to quote him. I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to say that he was on the ground with the park police, and what they had asked him to do was to stay static, not move, and that was what he was operating from. I don't know in that moment when they decided to move forward, but he was on the ground. I know he told me that yesterday or the day before, and was clear on that piece. But beyond that, maybe we get something from him to share with you.
Chairman Milley, do you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know with certainty, but I'm pretty sure that there was a planning session down at the FBI building in late morning, around noonish or early afternoon, where they divided up who was going to do what to whom. Major General Walker's there, Secretary McCarthy's there, and there's some others there. And I think that's what the agreement was as to where they would be. As to who gave the order, I don't know. I know Attorney General Barr spoke to that publicly, and I know that it's been mentioned, Park Police Captain, et cetera. I do not have personal knowledge as to who gave that actual order to clear the park.
Thank you. Mr. Whitman, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Sorry, didn't mean to surprise you there.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank our witnesses for joining us today. General Milley, I'd like to go into a little more depth. You answer the question about the training that our National Guardsmen have in responding to situations like we've seen here recently. As we know, most Americans associate National Guard with response to natural disasters and that sort of role. They're not used to seeing Guardsmen in the role that we've seen them recently. You talked about some units being trained for that direct contact, but are there instances where a Guard unit may be called up that doesn't have that particular training, or do they get the training across the full scope of what they may face? I understand how to organize, how to tactically address the situation, but there are other things too. You know, the element of controlling emotions, all those sorts of things, which are, you know, I call it the depth of training. It's not just the immediate tactical, but it's the depth of training to understand, hey, if you get in this situation, we see police go through that training all the time to be able to deal with the adrenaline and the emotions of the situation. Give us a little idea, a little more in-depth. I know you talked about that. But
yeah, I mean, your first National Guard unit of choice for civil unrest is is police. Mm-hmm. And remember, a lot of these Guardsmen are also cops in their civilian life. Mm-hmm. So. But they'll get very specific training on the rules on the use of force. They're not cops at the moment in time, so they're not going to conduct arrests, but they can do temporary detention. They're tasked with things like rules of conduct, crowd control, de-escalation procedures, how to make an appearance, don't react to verbal provocations, etc. So there's a wide variety of training they go through. A lot of it's vignette training and scenario training and STX type training. They do that during the course of the year. And then in this particular case, they got quick refresher training as well. Right. And they're trained on their equipment and so on and so forth. And in this particular case, you're looking at batons and shields and then their personal protective gear. None of them had any weapons downtown or right there at the Lafayette Square. So, but they're trained in all of that stuff. And they are the force, the military force that we would first call for civil unrest would be National Guard, military police. Sure. And then you'd go from there with other types of units.
Okay, very good. Secretary Esper, I want to ask you a little bit about the 1033 program. It obviously, through time to time, gets a lot of attention with the equipment that is formerly used by the military that would be available to civilian law enforcement. And the question is you know, does that militarize the police force? The questions always surround the central point of, do civilian police forces need that? And what connection is there to the military being requested for that equipment and the determination they make as to whether or not it's applicable for that to be sent to a civilian police force? Can you give us a little more lay down about what happens with the 1033 program? And does it just include the big equipment we hear about, or is it things like protective equipment like vests and those sorts of pieces of equipment?
Yeah, Congressman, as you know, it's a congressional program, right. And it's not something I've studied in much detail, and I don't think I could speak to what law enforcement deems as its requirements. It is something that I spoke with General Langell about the other day, and it's something that I hope that may come up as part of the after-action review to get their assessment, if not internal, but with law enforcement. But there is a wide range of items that are covered under that program. I can't pass judgment on some of the things. I would say I think we could all generally agree that if we have body armor, that would be helpful to the police to protect them. But beyond that, I'd like to wait and see how our review comes out, or if you have specific questions, I could take back and and maybe see if the Guard wants to take a look at it or somebody like that.
Very good. General Milley, any
Yeah,
comments?
I would say that, like in the case of D.C., with all of those different forces, uniforms, just simple uniforms as opposed to other types of equipment, that became an issue and was brought up a little early with the Bureau of Prisons. Our guys are wearing, camouflage uniforms, et cetera. Some of these police are in blue uniforms, other in camouflage, other in solid green, et cetera. That became, in terms of the lessons learned, that would be something I'd put in there as far as distinguishing character, because you want a clear definition between that which is military and that which is police, yes, in my view. And consistently, you want police, local police, state police, federal police dealing with law enforcement stuff. And if necessary, National Guard under governor control. But you want a clear distinction, that which is police, visual, yes, a visual distinction, that which is police and that which is military. Because when you start introducing the military, you're talking a different level of effort there.
I'm sorry, the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Esper is waving at me. What do you have quick there?
Just real quick, one of the things that we discussed the other day that I want to address is in terms of equipment. At one point, the National Guard, for example, cross-leveled its riot shields and lent them to the law enforcement. So if you saw police out there using a military police shield, it's because we cross-leveled it, and that's a lesson learned. Yeah. But if you're going to do that, then we got to figure out a way to mask the name military police so we don't confuse who is actually doing the crowd control.
Thank you. Mr. Malton's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I learned very early in my Marine training that there are two types of courage, physical and moral. And usually the toughest challenges that I faced in Iraq required moral courage. And Mr. Chairman, your apology for the events of June 1st at St. John's Church was an act not just of contrition, and rightly so, but also an act of moral courage. And I want to commend you for that. It's certainly unusual in this administration. Mr. Chairman, you clearly recognize the value of unity, not just in our military, but in our country. Do you believe that other countries, our various adversaries around the world, are interested in taking advantage of divisions and unrest in our country?
I not only believe that they would, I know they are.
Mr. Chairman, are you willing to elaborate on that in any detail?
It would be best to do that in a classified session.
Very well.
I have no doubt in my mind that foreign adversarial countries are trying to take advantage of civil unrest in the United States.
Well, I think it should go without saying that in fulfilling your primary job description to provide forthright military advice to the President, I strongly advise you to advise him to work to sew up these divisions rather than exacerbate them as he likes to do, as Secretary Mattis and others have described in intimate detail. Mr. Secretary, turning to you, I don't think you get to pick and choose which leaks you like, which leaks aren't damaging versus what is an OPSEC problem. This White House routinely uses leaks to their advantage, but suddenly it's a problem for their apologists. Now, you and I have both commanded troops in combat, been responsible for their force protection. So I can assure you that I also don't care about the mere semantics of an intelligence report and whether or not a particular word was used or not used. That proves nothing. What matters is the substance. And I have never seen in my time in combat when we didn't take any threat to our troops seriously, regardless of the confidence in the intelligence report, which is never 100%. Whether it was leaked or not, we take action. So a very simple question. When were you made aware of Russian material support of the Taliban, who we all know have been killing American troops in Afghanistan for years, and what action did you take?
Congressman, let me say on the first part, though, of your statement, you talked about credibility of threats and all that. As you've heard us say, that the reports have not been corroborated. Nonetheless,
my understanding is that some intelligence agencies believe that. There's not general consensus on that. But the bottom line is,
all the defense intelligence agencies have been unable to corroborate that report. But to one of the points you made, let me say this. You may have seen my written statement that was put out on my behalf. What I said was, regardless, We do, I do, he does. The commanders take all reports seriously, regardless of the degree of credibility or confidence. And I think that's the point you were trying to make. And
Absolutely.
I want to reassure you of that. We have been in discussions with the commanders about this. I know General Miller and General McKenzie going back as early as January. We're looking into this, pulling the threads, taking appropriate force protection measures. Our troops are already at the highest force protection level, but nonetheless, it's something that when I talk to them all the time about how can we do better, how can we do more.
So, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned January.
Right.
What action did you take to counter Russia? Not to improve force protection of our troops, but to directly counter this threat from Russia.
Yeah, so I didn't see the first report until February when it came out in a intelligence piece of paper. I think General McKenzie and General Miller, the chairman will help me here, got some initial reporting on the ground that they began pursuing. Neither thought the reports were credible as they dug into them. And in the time we have, I'd see General Milley might be able to kind of add some more color to that.
Yeah, I don't want to go too deep into the actual intel, but I've got multiple tours in Afghanistan, as you know, Congressman, and I've been aware of Russian meddling for years.
I understand, but my question is,
2013 or so.
What action did you take?
Well, specifically, at the tactical and operational military action, there is no military action that intelligence specifically warranted, like conduct a raid or go after.
I understand, but at the strategic level.
I do apologize, sorry, but the gentleman's time has expired, and that's not a question that I think is going to be answered in the next couple of seconds. So we'll have to take that for the record and get back to
I'll get you an answer. I'll give you an explicit answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Milley, I'll allow you to respond to Congressman Moulton specifically as it relates to the depth, duration, and extent of the Russian malign influence campaign in Afghanistan and perhaps the extent to which that well predates the current administration.
Well, first I want to be clear. It's not just Russia. There's many other countries that are influencing various actors in Afghanistan. And they are influencing them with training, money, weapons, propaganda, and international support, and a lot of other things. And I'm not going to go into source and methods how we know that, but we know that. With respect to Russia, Russia is one of those countries that's been doing that for years. And they're doing it for their own reasons. The military action for us, and they're doing it through the Taliban and Haqqani and other groups. So the military action for us is the issue, first and foremost, is force protection. Regardless of who's providing weapons or who's providing money, our force protection measures are at the highest levels, and they're going to stay at the highest levels as long as we have troops out there.
But just so that I could focus the question.
But I want to go to what we're doing for action. So at the tactical and operational level, there's no particular military action that we're not doing that we should be doing. The issue is higher than that. The issue is at the strategic level. What should or could we be doing at the strategic level? Is there diplomatic and informational and economic? Are there sanctions? Are there demarches? Are there phone calls? Are there pressure? Those sorts of things. And I can tell you that some of that is done. Are we doing as much as we could or should? Perhaps not only to the Russians but to others. But a lot of it is being done. Some of it's quiet, some of it's not so quiet. But don't think that we're not doing anything, because that's not true. Now, I want to get to specifically to the bounties. That is a unique, discrete piece of information that is not corroborated. You've all been briefed on it. I have too, and I and the Secretary and many others are taking it serious. We're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to find out if, in fact, it's true, and if it is true, we will take action.
And I'm glad you mentioned the other countries. September 5th, 2010, this is from the Times of London, Iran pays the Taliban to kill U.S. soldiers.
That's right.
Then also following up on that, there's a December 2nd, 2015 report from Fox News, report Iran paying Taliban to kill U.S. troops. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter these in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And General Milley, is it safe to say, given these reports along with the testimony you just provided, that the environment in Afghanistan, the very nature of the place and the very nature of the entities involved, means that our presence there does create these risks where our foreign adversaries create incentives and resources and opportunities for our service members to be harmed.
Anytime you commit U.S. military forces anywhere on earth, there's going to be risk. We went to Afghanistan for a single purpose, to prevent Afghanistan from ever being a platform to attack the United States of America with terrorists. And we've been there ever since to do that. We are drawing down forces in accordance with the agreement that was signed with the Taliban last February. There hasn't been significant Taliban or Haqqani attacks on U.S. forces since that agreement was signed. And per the direction of the President of the United States, we are drawing down forces, as you'll see unfold, and you'll be briefed on that in full coming into the fall. But there's always risk, Congressman, and I know you know that. There's always risk. There's nothing risk-free here.
It's a risk I know you both appreciate, given your service to the country. It's a risk I know the President appreciates. I've had the occasion to join him at Dover when my constituents have come back for dignified transfer, and that risk being so ever present seems to accentuate the importance of your mission to draw down troops, to create some semblance of normalcy in Afghanistan to the extent to which that's even possible. And I believe that it is an unrealistic goal to say that we have to chase every terrorist into every cave forever and stay there forever in order to protect the homeland. I think that we've proven that we can be more resilient at home without being more extended abroad, and that after 19, 20 years in Afghanistan, our nation is growing very weary of this. We're growing weary of the dignified transfers. We're growing weary of the cost in terms of blood and treasure. And we grow weary of these circumstances where our adversaries, not just Russia, but Iran and others that are in the region, utilize our continued presence. They utilize our might I say, unfocused extension of this conflict to try to harm Americans. So I wish you Godspeed in the mission that you're on to draw down those forces. And I thank you for giving us the briefing, and certainly for enlightening us to the fact that this was not some
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Carbajal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Milley and Secretary Esper, thank you for joining us today to cover these very important issues. Before I get to my questions, I want to take a moment to mention Specialist Vanessa Gillian, who disappeared from Fort Hood in April after confiding in her family that she had been sexually harassed by a sergeant. Her remains were tragically found a few days ago. I'm sure you're both aware of her story. I expect that you will do everything in your power to ensure that a full and independent investigation is completed, and continue to work to make our military welcoming and safe for our female service members. As for today's topics, what you noted in your testimonies, our country is going through a period of anger and self-reflection regarding how our society treats and includes certain members of our nation. While I appreciate your words, actions speak louder. Secretary Esper, what concrete steps have you already taken, and what other immediate actions do you plan on taking in the coming months to ensure that diversity is substantially valued and increased at all levels of our military, especially amongst the officer ranks?
Congressman, thank you. And first of all, you mentioned Specialist Guillen. What a terrible tragedy, murder. It's just horrible, tragic story, and I feel for the family, and they have my deepest sympathies and condolences. And we will conduct a full and thorough investigation and get to the bottom of all that happened and hold those accountable as appropriate. With that, your question is spot on. Look, we recognize that race is a problem in the military across the nation. Discrimination, prejudice, bias. I talked about in my quick action items. I have a list. I'll probably put that out next week in terms of immediate things that we will do to start getting rid of hidden bias in the military, such as removing photographs from promotion boards. But I've also had the privilege over the last 3 weeks to hold over a half dozen listening sessions with soldiers, sailors, airmen of all ranks across the country, and simply listen. Beginning the conversation alone is something we've never really done. And the chance to sit down with these young men and women, I probably spent a total of 10 hours or so just listening, having discussion, understanding that we don't even have the right terms and language and understandings of the definitions to have such a tough conversation. And I sat through many of them. So that'll be part of what we're going to begin. But I think in terms of standing up the defense board and ultimately the Defense Advisory Committee that is mirrored on Dakowitz. I want to believe in some ways it's an historic step, a major step forward to really get at this underlying issue that is hung around the neck of our country for well over 200 years, and to address the fundamental problems of racism and discrimination, prejudice and bias, both conscious and unconscious. Because at the end of the day, for DOD, it's about having a cohesive, unified, ready force. And we rely heavily on persons from all backgrounds, creeds, races, ethnicities, genders, etc., to make us the greatest fighting force in the world.
Thank you, Secretary Esper. I want to ask another question. General Milley and Secretary Esper, I would like to also take a moment to commend you regarding the statements you made at Lafayette Square, being there in field fatigues. You state that it was a mistake and you learned from it. I believe over the last month there are many moments we can all learn from. Regret is one thing, but what would you do different in a similar future situation? And while I understand we are waiting reports on specific instances, such as the low-flying National Guard helicopters and reconnaissance planes, what lessons has the department learned about its response, and how are you both working to make improvements?
You know, Congressman, you go back to the June 1st, the evening of June 1st, it became apparent to me late that evening. I think Chairman Milley and I had spent a couple hours walking around D.C. speaking to the soldiers. We were at the World War II Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial, and it became very clear that we needed to speak on this topic. And if you recall, and I think I entered into the record, Mr. Chairman, already, I put a statement out to the force within 18 hours or so that said very clearly that we have an oath to the Constitution, and that is our sworn oath to protect and defend the American people and to give the American people the freedom to peaceably assemble and offer their speech, and that we at all times must do our best to remain an apolitical institution. That, I believe, is why we have the highest regard and respect in the country and have maintained that for many years.
Mr. Carbajal, your time is, I apologize. Mr. Carbajal, your time has expired. Ms. Hartzell, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. First of all, I want to commend you for the amazing professional job that you all have done, especially the National Guardsmen, in very, very difficult situations. Mr. Secretary, you just mentioned the oath to defend our First Amendment rights. And just to review that, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of the religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievance. What I have seen and what this country has witnessed in the last few weeks, I would argue, has not been peaceable in many times. And the National Guardsmen, these brave men and women who have volunteered and left their home to protect their country, they have faced with only batons and shields. They've been yelled at, called names that are unbelievable. They've had bricks thrown at them. They've been shoved. They've had frozen water bottles thrown at them. I've seen on TV fireworks being shot at them. And they have stood there. They have professionally taken it. They have defended our monuments and our treasures. And I just want to commend them. At the same time, I want to denounce these actions of some Americans. And this is violence. This is not peaceably assembling, and it should be treated as such. And we've had questions about training, and Mr. Secretary, I know you were just at Fort Leonard Wood a couple of weeks ago, and our community was so thrilled to host you, and I know that you have seen our missions there, including being home of the Army's Military Police School. And hopefully you've seen that we have room to expand, and we've heard a little bit about the training. I'm wondering if you think it would be helpful to have centralized training to ensure consistency across all of the armed forces in military police actions, civil unrest behaviors. And
it's a good question, Congresswoman. I'd like to take that back, certainly for the National Guard and how they train. It is very important that, particularly for the Guard that has this as a mission essential task, to make sure that we have a solid baseline. But I like to be deliberate and thoughtful on these things and get back to you.
Well, thank you. You'd,
Typically, Congresswoman, it's not going to be possible to do centralized training given the scale of the military in terms of the numbers. So what is typically done is training is centrally planned, the task, conditions, and standards, training and doctrine commands of each of the services lay out all the requirements, and then it is distributed for execution by unit commanders. That's for the forces that are in the operational force. All of the units in all of the different services go through the training schoolhouse. So having one central location for all things civil disturbance, that can be okay for doctrine, for tasks, conditions, standards, to lay that out, and that is typically what everyone does. But then the execution of the actual training, that needs to be more decentralized and distributed.
All right, thank you. The Insurrection Act has been mentioned as well, and you were asked a lot of questions where you're supposed to ask yes or no, so I'll carry on that for just one more question. Do you realize that the Insurrection Act was not acted on in the recent days?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now that we have that clear, could there be scenarios in the future for a president where perhaps a Insurrection Act might be utilized and could be helpful?
Congresswoman, let me answer this way. Rather than speculating and offer, let me offer history. The Insurrection Act was used in 1957 by President Eisenhower to federalize the Guard in Arkansas and to also call up the 101st Airborne Division in order to protect 9 African-American students known as the Little Rock Nine so that they can go to school. It was called up in 1962 by President Kennedy to federalize the Mississippi National Guard to secure the University of Mississippi, Oxford, in order to ensure James Meredith, an African-American Air Force veteran, could go to school. The military police remained there for over a year. In 1965, President Johnson deployed active duty forces to protect peaceful protest marchers in Alabama to ensure that they could protest peacefully, opposing, I believe, segregation and affirming their First Amendment rights. So if you look at history, you can see where the Insurrection Act was used to advance civil rights, and in a very positive way that our history accounts fairly well.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Brown is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 questions. I will ask them quickly, and I hope that you can answer them briefly. The first for you, General Milley. I know that you are a student of history of warriors and warfare of the United States and our armed forces, and that you use that knowledge and understanding of our history to guide your decisions and thinking. You not only understand, but you embody the values that we live by and that we die by as soldiers. Can you comment on the naming of Army installations after Confederate soldiers? Does it reflect the values that we instill in soldiers? Are these Confederate officers held up as role models in today's military? Does it help or hurt the morale or unit cohesion of service members, particularly that of the black and brown service members who live and serve on these installations today?
Congressman, we've had a lot of discussions in the Department of Defense and in the Joint Chiefs and amongst the senior leaders on that very topic. I'll give you a couple of things to think about. I personally think that the original decisions to name those bases after Confederate generals, the 10 bases you're talking about in the Army, those were political decisions back in the 1910s and 20s and 30s and World War I, World War II time, for 100 years ago. And they're going to be political decisions today. The military equity here is divisiveness. And as you mentioned, cohesion. 43% of the United States military are minorities. And in the Army, for example, and these are Army bases you're talking about, we're up to 20+% African American, and in some units you'll see 30%. And for those young soldiers that go on to a base, a Fort Hood or a Fort Bragg or a Fort wherever named after a Confederate general, they can be reminded that that general fought for an institution of slavery that may have enslaved one of their ancestors. I had a staff sergeant when I was a young officer who actually told me that at Fort Bragg, and he said he went to work every day on a base that represented a guy who enslaved his grandparents. So the symbols of it's not just the, we have to improve the substance of promotions, et cetera, in the military, but we've also got to take a hard look at the symbology, the symbols, things like Confederate flags and statues and bases and all that kind of stuff. The Confederacy, the American Civil War, was fought. And it was an act of rebellion. It was an act of treason at the time against the Union, against the Stars and Stripes, against the U.S. Constitution. And those officers turned their back on their oath. Now, some have a different view of that. Some think it's heritage. Others think it's hate. The way we should do it matters as much as that we should do it. So we need to have, I've recommended a commission of folks to take a hard look at the bases, the statutes, the names, all of this stuff, to see if we can have a rational, mature discussion.
General Milley, I appreciate it. I do want to get to Secretary Esper.
I got it.
I want to take a moment to thank you, Secretary, for clarifying your position on the use of force and deployment of our military against civilians exercising their constitutional rights to assemble, to petition our government, and peacefully protest. Mr. Secretary, as you stated in your June 17th statement, we strive to create an environment of diversity and inclusion in the military. You specifically stated removing bias and prejudice in all its forms and ensuring equal opportunity and respect for all will make us stronger, more capable, and more ready as a joint force. Last month, both the U.S. Marine Corps and U.S. Navy announced plans to ban the Confederate flag and associated imagery on faces and installations around the world. This symbol honors those who fought, as General Milley mentioned, to maintain oppression and slavery. Furthermore, the Confederate flag is used, albeit not by everyone, but is used by white supremacists and other organizations seeking to spread hate and racism. In the NDAA, we include a provision to ban its display on all department property, but I believe that immediate action should be taken. What is your plan regarding a department-wide ban of this symbol?
Thanks, Congressman. First of all, let me again, echo what you said about the National Guard. And I'm reminded this is a use of force card that was handed out to the D.C. Guard, and here prominently in bold says, "Remember to preserve the peace and allow fellow Americans to peacefully assemble and exercise their First Amendment rights." That's what our Guard was trained on when they were operating in D.C. Look, I have a process underway by which to look at a number of issues, both substantive and symbolic. There'll be a combination of the Defense Board and the Advisory Committee. We want to take a look at all those things. There is a process underway by which we affirm.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Secretary, if you could wrap up quickly. The gentleman's time has expired.
Which we affirm what types of flags are authorized on U.S. military bases. I want to make sure that we have an approach that is enduring, that could withstand legal challenge, but that unites us and most importantly helps build cohesion and readiness. And again, that process is underway. And
thank you. I think that
yes, sir.
Got the gist. Mr. Waltz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Waltz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, General Milley, I just want to commend Guard. I absolutely want to commend the Guard for its professionalism, for its poise.
I'm sorry, Mr. Waltz, you are deep in the water here. We cannot understand you. Can you give it one more quick try, or we may have to move on?
Okay. How are we doing now?
Much better. Go.
I just want to commend the Guard. My understanding is we have over 70,000. That's roughly 6th Division currently deployed for the homeland and overseas. That's for COVID. That's for civil unrest. That's for ongoing overseas missions. We haven't even gotten into hurricane season in Florida or wildfires or others. Mr. Secretary, the Guard's defense strategy points to demographic and economic trends that are critical to where we have the force structure around the country, and says that it must be prepared to reposition Guard force structure in light of those shifting trends, particularly shifting population, which, as we know, has shifted fairly drastically over the last several decades. Yet the force structure hasn't followed. In fact, in Florida right now ranks 53 out of 54 states and territories in terms of the size of its Guard per capita of its population. I think we all know with every hurricane bearing down every season, wildfires and others, how much it's used. Can you come back to me for the record? Can you work with the NGB, Langell? I don't know if you'll hear me. I'm interference.
I'm sorry, Mr. Well, once again, we've sort. Mr. Wallace, we can't understand you. I think the first part of your question was reasonably clear. Mr. Esper, if you wanted to take a stab at the guard situation in Florida, answer that if you can, you can take a shot at it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Waltz, thank you. I think from what I caught, I'll follow up with you offline. I think you were talking about the disposition or maybe the composition of guard forces in Florida and how it's changed over time or not with demographics. So maybe I'll just follow up with you offline. And I think you asked that we have a conversation with General Engel. That's what I took from that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if you could hear me, just a slight tweak there. It's nationwide. It's how the Guard is shifting to reflect population flows. Particularly, we're looking at the per capita. Florida's population has doubled since the 1980s, yet its Guard has remained stagnant. So that would be one piece, and then the other piece. I think I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, you're breaking up. I apologize. We're going to have to move on. We've got a limited amount of time. We'll get that back to him, but we cannot hear you properly. So we're going to move on to Mr. Keating. He's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your straightforward way you're addressing the Lafayette Square issue and civil law enforcement. I appreciate that. I want to circle back before we're done because I know how a video clip can work. Secretary Esper, you were asked, I believe by Mr. Turner, about bounties. And I want to be clear. The question was asked, was the word bounties used in reports that you might have reviewed regarding attacks on our troops? So let me be clear. You can acknowledge, since you acknowledged there was no bounties, that indeed there were reports that mentioned payments. Is that correct?
Congressman, that's correct. I was responding to the specific question of do I recall use of the word bounties, and I think what I said is I do not recall the use of that word.
You answered it correctly, but I didn't want a soundbite at the end of this hearing coming out that said that you said that you never saw a report on bounties. So that's clear.
I always try to avoid politics, Congressman.
I know. In any case, I didn't want you to be drawn into it unnecessarily. How's that? In any case, Director Haskell, CIA Director Haskell, just in the last few days has said how important it is for force protection that the dissemination of information occurs and is shared to all national security community members, obviously to you, all of you, in an ongoing effort to secure our troops. So she also, it was underscored clearly that the immediate versus delayed dissemination of that information, intelligence reports, is critical. Are you satisfied that you're getting immediate transfer of this intelligence from our other agencies, so if it's actionable, you can act on that? Can you state that for the record, that you don't perceive any delays, that this is really a live time dissemination to you?
Congressman, I get a lot of reports every day, an inch thick of material I try and get through and read through. I know the Hill, this committee gets reports as well. And I think you saw the same reports that I saw on this topic. It's hard for me to gauge the timeliness because I don't know when they start or when they get it. But clearly there's a process part of this, an analysis part that once they get information, converting it in and converting it into intelligence, all that happens. I just don't have a sense of the timing. But
I don't want to interrupt, but
I'll follow up with her. So I can follow up with her on that offline.
Please do, because it's essential that you get that information. I also want to know independently. Some of these unsourced reports do a lot for family members. I come from a family where we lost a family member in action, and particularly, reports around 2019, the casualties that were there, the soldiers we lost. Could you tell us independently, are you looking into those as well, given the intelligence you have, particularly the April 2019 suicide bombing outside of Bagram Air Base that killed 3 of our U.S. Marines? Are you looking at least this independently based on the intelligence you have?
Congressman, first of all, I share the concern and condolences still to the family of those Marines, I believe, who were lost. Let me say this much, and I'll ask Chairman Milley to jump in here. General McKenzie is looking back over time. I think he stated publicly as well as He doesn't see causality with that one. And I believe that I got a separate report from one of my intelligence agencies saying they cannot find any corroborating evidence with regard to that alleged program, with regard to that attack on those 3 Marines. But, Chairman?
Congressman, as of today, right now, we don't have cause and effect linkages to a Russian bounty program causing U.S. military casualties. However, we are still looking. We're not done. We're going to run this thing to ground.
Yeah, well, thank you. And just as clarification from an intelligence standpoint, without being wonky, I mean, corroboration usually isn't a term that's used, but it's usually remote, improbable, even odds, probable, highly probable. Those are the kind of, or certain. Those are the kind of intelligence terms that are done, linking things together. I'll yield back. I'm actually yielding back some time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Vila, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Esper and Chairman Milley, I've got 2 questions, and whatever time is left, I'd like to yield to Ms. Lockton so that she can get ready for that. But my first question refers to Vanessa Guillen that Mr. Carvajal brought up. And what I'd like to do is, I'm sure you're both as disturbed as we all are by the events leading to her death. And what I'd like to do is give you an opportunity. She has family members in my district, and would like to give you the opportunity to tell that family what we're going to do to make sure that those sorts of things don't happen again.
Congressman, let me first go first and speak to you, but more importantly, the family, and just express our sincere condolences with regard to what happened to Specialist Guillen. It's tragic. It's horrible. I watched this over the preceding couple months in terms of how it unfolded. I can't imagine the despair of the parents not knowing what the fate of their daughter, and it's just a terrible incident. I spoke yesterday or the day before with Secretary McCarthy. They're on top of that. As you know, they have a couple suspects I think have been arrested. And they are digging deeply into the investigation. I think we need to continue to pursue that and take a hard look at that. And then, we got to continue to work at what is believed to be the underlying issue, and that was she was sexually harassed, if not assaulted, by the soldier in question. That is something that continues to be a stain on the profession. And we've made a lot of progress over 10 years. But nowhere near we need to be. We need to get to zero tolerance of sexual harassment and sexual assault, and we need to make sure that everybody in our ranks knows where they can go to for help, where they can find help, and we got to continue to emphasize that. We got to continue to empower the chain of command and make sure we do everything possible to make sure that we never have another incident like what happened to Specialist Guillen. And so that is my commitment, and I know it's the Chairman's commitment as well. Chairman?
Yeah, I would echo everything the Secretary said. As a father of a daughter, that's just a nightmare. I mean, my heart bleeds for that family, and I can't even begin to imagine what they're going through. But I want them to know that we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that that doesn't happen again. I don't know all the details. The full investigation will come out by Secretary McCarthy. I suspect, although I don't know, that there were probably some missed signals. And one of the key lessons that we've learned in other situations is when we do get early warning, it's to take action, and take action swiftly and appropriately. So I think my guess is that will probably come out in this case, and that will be one of the things we need to implement for the future to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, thanks to both of you. My other question is for you, Secretary Esper. And you recently extended the deployment of 4,000 troops to the southern border. And what I'm wondering is, and just today in the Rio Grande Valley, the hospitals were forced to set up tents to serve as ICU units. And I'm wondering if there's any consideration being given to using those troops to help support
local efforts to confront the coronavirus pandemic?
Congressman, I'll answer your question two ways. First of all, you're right. We did reduced it, but extended the deployment. We're there, as you know, in support of the Department of Homeland Security, and as they give us mission statements, we try and be responsive and supportive of what they do. In this case, if they need additional medical support, that is clearly something that we can provide if needed. I think beyond that, unless I misunderstood your question, we are now reacting to incoming requests from FEMA. I spoke to Director Gaynor the other night with regard to COVID spikes in Texas, throughout Texas. As you may or may not know, we have already deployed a team of medical personnel to assist in Texas, and we are on the alert and looking for outbreaks in other states such as Arizona, Florida, California, to make sure that we are responsive to the American people in terms of dealing with any outbreaks that may happen around the country.
And the gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Kim is recognized.
Thank you so much for coming out here and talking to us today. As you referred earlier, many of us members were briefed here in this room earlier today about the intelligence and about what we know about possible Russian payments to the Taliban or militants to kill American soldiers and service members in Afghanistan. I have to tell you, leaving aside the discussions about whether or not there is sufficient evidence regarding possible bounties or payments, whatever we want to call it, I have to say that the intelligence and what we know about Russian efforts in Afghanistan, writ large, targeting our personnel, is deeply concerning to me. And General Milley, you made reference to this, saying that this is something that we've known for quite some time and quite a number of years. I just wanted to ask this question. I couldn't help but, while I'm in this room getting this brief, and think about a previous time that we've been in this exact room together at the beginning of this year talking about Iran. And at that time, Secretary Esper and others were talking about how there was a threat to our personnel with regards to our personnel in Iraq and the region due to Iranians and Iranian-backed militias. So I want to just hear from you, both of these instances of what we do know about Russia's involvement in Afghanistan, both of them involved another nation arming and directing militants to kill American service members or target American service members abroad. Yet I see two very different reactions to this coming from you, from the administration. So I wanted to ask for your explanation of what is the difference in the posture there between what our conversations in January as what we're having today. Secretary Esper.
So, Congressman, I think they are two very different situations. So with regard to Iran, you had a case of the head of the IRGC, which is designated by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization. He was the foreign terrorist leader of that foreign terrorist organization. He had the blood of hundreds of Americans going back many, many years on his hands. He had orchestrated the rocket attacks that had preceded, that had occurred in that December. And we had clear, credible information that he was planning additional attacks on American personnel in the region. So a very different circumstance between what we saw, the evidence we had, our understanding of the threat in Iraq that was being on that battlefield that was being orchestrated by Soleimani, and it was the clear consensus of the President's national security team that he was a legitimate target. Again, very different from information we're picking up with regard to Russia, et cetera. But, Chairman, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I want to key on something you said, Congressman. We've been aware for some time of Russian involvement or Iranian involvement or Pakistani or Chinese involvement in other countries. But there's a big distinction between arming and directing. We know about arms, we know about weapons, we know about support and things like that. We don't have, in the case of the Russians, we do not have concrete corroborating evidence, intelligence, to show directing. And that's a big difference. And if we did, there'd be a different response too. So, but that's what I'm saying. We're not done looking. We're going to dig into this. We're going to get to the bottom of it, this bounty thing. If in fact there's bounties, I'm an outraged general, just like every one of us in uniform is. If in fact there's bounties directed by the government of Russia or any of their institutions to kill American soldiers, that's a big deal. That's a real big deal. We don't have that level of fidelity yet. We're still looking.
Well, we'll continue to go through the intelligence with you. Regardless of whether the payments were made, I felt that there was significant information there about directing. But again, we'll continue that conversation going forward.
Congressman, just curious, were you able to get the briefing today?
I did.
Okay,
That's
good.
right.
Good.
Just one last question. When we talked about the National Guard being utilized, you were talking, General Milley, about the training that they often get. Yet when we looked at it, out of the 5,100 guardsmen and women who were here in D.C. Last month, only 154 from the D.C. National Guard were military police, 26 security forces. From other states, only 83 were military police and 4 were security forces. That's 5% out of the 5,100. Secretary Esper, when you sent out your notice of emergency deployment, you focused on active duty military police units. Why was that not done the same for our guardsmen in terms of prioritizing military police personnel?
And this will have to conclude. I understand the Secretary has to go. We are over time, so up to you how long you wish to answer that question, and then we will be done. Go ahead.
Probably the chairman may be better situated, but every soldier undergoes a certain level of training, and of course we would not ask them to perform a mission if they weren't briefed on the rules of engagement and had a basic level of training. But your point is a fair one, is we try and prioritize, as the chairman noted earlier, the best for these situations would be military police units. But you also have to go with what you have available at the time to do that. And that's why I'm so proud of our guardsmen who were, in many cases, performing missions that weren't core missions, but were a core mission as a soldier or an airman.
Thank you. I will say there were a lot of members who do not have an opportunity to question. I understand the Secretary does have to go. We would like to have the opportunity to submit those questions for the record and get answers as quickly as possible. And with that, we are adjourned.